Okay, I wanted to make an actual response to that whole thing. That other response to pro-think, whatever person was one response. I wanted to make a legitimate response to the whole situation. Basically, for those that haven't seen it, basically what occurred was there was a student at the University of Florida who asked a former presidential candidate, current senator of Massachusetts, John Kerry, a question about not only the 2004 election, but also asked him was he a part of Skull and Bones. I forget the name of the organization. One of the elitist organizations that existed early in the 1960s. It actually still exists to this day at Ivy League universities all across the U.S. While the second question, and even the first question, might have been out of place, the police around him, the university police that were assigned to that particular forum, took it upon themselves to basically subdue the student, not based on the question that he asked, but just because in their eyes he was quote-unquote inciting a riot. They actually arrested him on that fact. There was a larger police officer that stood directly behind him and actually grabbed him by, I guess, his arm and his neck in the same motion, I think his left arm, and just pulled him back, and then was able to bring him to the ground. At that point, they pulled him to the back of the forum. At that point, obviously, students were up in an uproar. They surrounded it and filmed from every different angle known to man. And basically, this forum basically escalated into the police thought it escalated into a riot. Just because a few students were yelling, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you subduing this student?" And the police officers didn't address any students and say, "This is why we're addressing this student. This is why we're subduing." They just said, "Back up, back up, back up," which is police protocol as far as I know. At that point, the student began to struggle with the police officers, because he struggled because he was, number one, scared, and number two, he was trying to figure out, okay, why am I getting arrested? Since it wasn't made clear to him, obviously he's going to struggle. That's just an instinct that normal people get when, number one, they're nervous, and number two, they don't know why they're being subdued by a police officer. I'm not saying for this from personal experience, just what I'm used to seeing on television, what I'm used to hearing in stories from friends, family, whatever. Again, at this point, again, it had escalated to it escalated to the point where he was moving a lot, and they started to taser him. I think they tasered him once, and at that point, he was no longer, in their eyes, reckless. At that point, they were able to bring him outside and take him downstairs. At that point, they took him actually outside of the forum hall at the University of Florida and told him at that point. They didn't tell him when they were trying to subdue him after he asked a question. They didn't do it when they were trying to. They didn't tell him what he was being arrested for when they tried to subdue him, and they didn't tell him when he was being tasered while they were arresting him. They didn't tell him until he was outside and he was actually, in their eyes, in the right frame of mind. At that point, they told him, you're being arrested for inciting a riot. And while on the surface it won't look like he's, in my eyes, it doesn't look like he's. It didn't look like he was inciting a riot from the many angles that I saw the video. There were students, obviously, in an uproar because they were maybe a friend of his, maybe not, just concerned for his well-being. Just students concerned for his well-being, asking, why is this fellow student of ours being subdued for no reason? Because, again, they didn't know at the time that he was being subdued. They subdued him after he had asked a question. If he was inciting a riot, in my eyes, would be asking a question and then all the students getting up and all the people there, because I know some of them weren't students, but now all the people that were there at the forum getting up and raising their fists and making a fuss about whatever issue he asked a question about. That, in my eyes, would be inciting a riot. Throwing of chairs, people throwing things at John Kerry after being rushed out of the forum and things like that. That would be inciting a riot. Asking a question, a provoking question, is not inciting a riot. students obviously, after he asked the question again, got up and clapped because he was being subdued, because they agreed with the fact that he shouldn't have asked the question. While I agree that John Kerry shouldn't have had, while I understand that John Kerry had the additional security, I understand that. I believe that the forcefulness, I guess, that the police used, just wasn't necessary. All they had to do if they wanted to subdue him was that those two larger police officers that were able to bring him down could have did the job. They, when they put your knee on your neck and your knee on all of your limbs, that pretty much subdues you. At that point, they had done that. Again, I think at that point, to taser him in addition to that was kind of unfortunate. And again, there are one of the other users on YouTube actually made a good point. There are a lot of other people who responded to all these different videos from all these different angles, and basically said, that, and I'm in agreement with that individual, that basically said that, all these people are saying that his leg should have been broken and there's so many worse things that should have been done to him because he asked that question. No. The problem is, the police should not have gone to that level of brutality when it came to getting a response from him. The response they got, yes, was not a positive response, but that was only because they enticed it to that level. If you are subdued, this is anyone in any country, if you are subdued by a police officer and you are not told why you're being subdued, most police officers on instinct will tell you, because they're taught to do that, will tell you why you're being subdued. They will say you're being arrested for, stop resisting. They're going to tell you eventually why they are putting such a force in bringing you down. They're going to tell you that. Those officers proceeded to not tell him until they took him out of the forum, because they believed he was, quote-unquote, inciting a riot. Now, again, once they got him downstairs, it was actually interesting. They brought him down the stairs, and they actually asked him, do you know your name and everything like that. And this was after one of the police officers got his ID, his cell phone, and I believe his camera, because he actually asked for his camera in one of the longer videos. And it's very interesting that that police officer had the gall, I guess, to ask him his name. Maybe she thought he was intoxicated or anything like that. But it's my understanding that when you're tasered, this is just, again, from the videos I've seen on the Discovery Channel and everything like that, when you're tasered, you do become a little disoriented. So for the officer to have the gall to ask him the question, do you know your name, when she had his ID in his hand, in his wallet, which she had on her person at the time, not on his person, but her person, because obviously the police officer's next instinct after they subdue an individual is they take all identification. She had the identification in her hand. So for her to ask the question, what is your name, do you know why you're here, and everything like that, that's a question you ask if he's being disorderly and he's actually intoxicated. From the reports, from the videos, and everything like that, you could tell he wasn't intoxicated. While there are also reports that say he's done crazy things like this individual has done crazy, quote-unquote, crazy things like this in the past. That's understandable. But at the same time, for the police officers to go to this level and then ask him questions like, what's your name? What are you doing? Do you know why you're here? Do you know why you're being arrested? Of course he doesn't know, because they didn't tell him until 5 minutes, until about, I'd say maybe 10 minutes until after he was actually, in their eyes, again, in the right mind. And I hate to use the quote every so often, but whatever. I'm not going to make this video too long, but I just wanted seeing so many people pretty much echo the same thing over and over and over again in response to this video, in terms of just being in agreement with the police officers. While I understand the police officers are doing their job in protecting John Kerry, I understand that. John Kerry needs protection at anywhere he goes. Any elected official needs that kind of protection. At the same time, that student had the right to ask the question that he did. While he might not have been in the right mind, while he might be a conspiratist and, just asking questions, just not in the right mind, that's no reason to subdue him in the manner that they did. They do not have the right, as police officers. Their job is to protect and serve, not to, protect and subdue. You subdue if the individual is at a level of threatening to that police officer or the surroundings and people in those surroundings. Asking a question is not threatening. He did not incite a riot. People only were up in an uproar once, one, he asked a question, and two, or I'm sorry, after he asked the question because he was being subdued, and two, they were asking why they were being so forceful. That is the only reason people got excited. They didn't get excited to the point where they were going to incite a riot because the forum actually went on after that. So, obviously, they didn't incite a riot, or that individual didn't incite a riot, or any of those students that were there didn't incite a riot. So that's it. Just wanted to make this quick video response to that situation, and hopefully things like this won't happen again. I'm sure they will, unfortunately, but here's positive thinking. Hopefully they won't happen again. Hopefully some of the users that made those kind of crazy comments will, retract them a little bit and kind of rethink what they said before they send them. We'll see what happens.